My name is Isabella. I'm 35 years old, a single mother of two bright, well-behaved children. I'm a high school teacher, living simply, working hard, and for years I've tried to maintain a decent relationship with my family, even though I've always known they never truly valued me. Last week, I took my kids back to attend my mother's 70th birthday party. Inside the mansion where I grew up, filled with memories quietly overshadowed by favoritism, I forced myself to smile as my kids and I brought a homemade apple pie to the banquet table. And then, amid the clinking of glasses and the glow of chandeliers, my mother stood up, raised her champagne flute, and said with pride, "Let us all toast Amanda, my beloved daughter, who will inherit the entire estate and this house. As for Isabella, she just needs to learn to be grateful for having a seat at the table." Whispers of laughter spread. Relatives looked at me with half pity, half ridicule. Chloe and Ryan stood beside me, their cheeks flushed with embarrassment. But at that very moment, while everyone thought I would swallow the humiliation as I always had, I remembered something, a legal secret they had no idea I was holding. If you've ever been treated as an outsider by your own family, dismissed simply because you weren't the chosen child, leave a comment below. I'd like to hear your story. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. Because right now, I'll tell you exactly how I turned the entire game around, the one they thought they controlled completely. I stood there, in the glittering room, my back straight, my hands resting lightly on my children's shoulders, while my relatives still murmured with laughter after my mother's declaration. The expensive dresses, the sharply pressed suits, the faint clinking of glasses, everything pressed down on me like a play, in which I was never invited to play a leading role. I had grown used to that feeling. It started when I was very young. I was born into a family wealthy in possessions but empty of affection. My father, David Whitaker, was a renowned attorney specializing in inheritance disputes for the elite. Sharp, composed, always knowing how to turn situations to his advantage except when the situation had my name on it. My mother, Margaret, had once been the beauty queen of Harvard Law in the 80s. Gorgeous, graceful, always knowing when to smile to win favor. But that charm was always reserved for Amanda, my sister, 2 years older, with her golden hair, radiant smile, and bright blue eyes that perfectly mirrored our mother's. I didn't look like her. I carried the traits of my father's side: dark brown hair, deep brown eyes, fair skin that burned easily. From early on, I noticed the way my mother's gaze dimmed whenever it landed on me. She never said anything, but children always sense the silence that cuts deeper than words. There's a photo of me at 7 years old. Amanda stands in the middle of the living room, wearing a pink chiffon dress, a glittering plastic tiara on her head. Beneath the photo, a neat caption: "Congratulations, Princess Amanda, Junior Miss Massachusetts." Balloons, cake, nearly 40 guests in the background. And me, holding a book, standing in the far left corner, quiet as a shadow. Just a week before, I had won first place in the state math competition. No one in the family mentioned it. Once I asked my mother, while she was putting blush on Amanda before a family portrait, "I want a photo to hang in the living room too." She kept dusting Amanda's cheeks and replied softly, "When you accomplish something that makes people proud, I'll think about it." I folded the certificate, tucked it away in a drawer, and never brought it up again. It wasn't that I lacked opportunities. I had my own room, books, a private school with a driver, even scholarships for summer science camps. But everything I achieved was coated with invisible dust, the kind that dulls recognition. No matter how hard I tried, my parents' eyes always turned toward Amanda, the one who never had to try, yet was always chosen. I used to think maybe it was because I wasn't social enough, not gentle enough, not charming enough for adults. But looking back, I know now I simply wasn't the dream they wanted. My father once told his friends Amanda was the perfect heir. "She has charisma, she has instinct, she'll go far." When asked about me, He just chuckled. Isabella is practical. She won't disappoint, meaning she'll always be stable. Stable. A word spoken with such weary boredom. I didn't blame Amanda. She never did anything cruel to me. But she knew her place and relished it fully. Every handwritten letter from my mother while Amanda studied abroad was kept in a velvet box. I got short emails: eat properly, don't get sick. One year I caught a bad viral fever during college. No one visited. But when Amanda sprained her ankle at yoga class, the whole family flew to California to take care of her. As I grew older, I retreated further from the center of family gatherings, those events where my presence was needed only to fill out the picture. I learned how to keep quiet at the right times, smile politely, and keep my words just silent enough not to disturb them. Until I had children. Chloe and Ryan kept me moving forward after Ethan, their father, walked out without explanation, leaving me with 2 babies and a mortgage on a small suburban apartment. I once thought that if I couldn't be loved as a daughter, at least I would be respected as a mother. But even that never happened in the house I grew up in. Weekend dinners at my parents' were endurance tests. Amanda and her husband Charles bragged about European vacations, expensive private schools, and 3-star Michelin restaurants in New York they had happened to stop by. My parents nodded along, enthralled, as if listening to fairy tales. And me arriving with 2 children, wearing a pressed but worn dress, carrying a tin of homemade cookies, was met with a smirk. "Oh, you're still keeping things simple." When Chloe gifted my mother a crayon drawing, she held it with 2 fingers and set it aside without looking. But when Amanda's youngest gave her a plastic hair clip, my mother teared up, saying, "This child has had such taste since she was little. I didn't need to be better than anyone. I only wanted to be treated normally." But in this family, even that was too much to ask. I taught my children to be polite, kind, generous, but I began to wonder if I was also teaching them to accept being overlooked as a way of life. And then came that birthday. When my mother raised her glass, praised Amanda, declared that she would inherit everything, then told me coldly that I should learn to be grateful for having a seat at the table. I didn't feel shocked. I felt finished. No more tears. No more asking why. Just a strange silence inside me, and a crystal clear memory of a set of documents locked in my grandfather's old law office safe, where I once worked as a summer assistant during my senior year. I remembered his signature. I remembered the clause transferring the estate into a separate trust. And I remembered exactly who had been named the legal guardian of that trust: me. After the party, when night covered the mansion I once called home, I didn't drive back right away. I circled the old street, lined with maple trees, where I used to ride my bike to school, backpack heavy, heart eager after being chosen for the debate team. I remembered holding that paper high with pride. My mother had been arranging flowers, barely glanced, murmured, "Uh-huh," and 15 minutes later called me downstairs to help Amanda try on her new pageant gown. I left Massachusetts at 18, with a full scholarship in education at the University of Michigan. I finally unlocked the first door to my own world. I didn't have many friends, I didn't party, but every day felt like a clear step forward. I worked in the library, tutored in the evenings, and spent summers assisting at a small law office in Ann Arbor, where I stumbled upon a copy of my grandfather's trust documents. It was the one time I felt truly seen, not by anyone else, but by his choice. A quiet choice, unspoken, but enough to plant in me the belief that someone once thought I was worthy. After college, I stayed in Michigan to teach at a small public high school. I met Ethan at an education conference. He was an architect with a kind smile and eyes that made me feel safe. We married in less than 2 years. My mother didn't attend the wedding. She said she was busy babysitting for Amanda's trip to Paris. Ethan and I had peaceful years together. When Chloe was born, he cried as he held her. I still remember the night the three of us lay huddled in our tiny apartment, rain tapping the old roof, Ethan sketching at the desk while the warm yellow lamp lit the curve of his back. It felt eternal, but eternity is fragile. When Chloe was 3 and Ryan not yet 1, Ethan changed. He came home late, avoided my eyes, until the day I found a hotel receipt in his jacket. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He only said one sentence, "I feel suffocated," and then he left, without looking back. I didn't have the luxury to be bitter. The children were too young to understand why there was no more guitar in the living room at night, no more bedtime stories from Dad. I had to be both parents. I taught by day, graded papers by night, tutored weekends, paying the mortgage, making sure they had dental checkups without hesitation. Chloe resembles me quietly. She loves to read, adores classic literature, and often brings home books far above her age level. Once, I walked into her room and saw her writing a letter to Jane Eyre, asking if she ever felt lonely in her own family. I didn't know what to say. I just hugged her tightly and whispered, "I understand. Ryan is my whirlwind of curiosity." He once took apart the TV remote just to see the inside, then almost put it back together perfectly. He told me, "Mom, if I build a robot that cleans the house, will you get to rest?" I laughed, nodded, and told him I'd be his first investor. They are everything I have, and I swore I'd never let them feel like outsiders, no matter what the world threw at us. Sometimes Amanda called not to check in, but to brag about her daughter getting into an art academy in New York, or that Charles had bought another house in Florida. Every call ended with the same line, "You really should improve your life, Bella. Don't let those kids grow up lacking." I just murmured, "Uh-huh," because I had already learned not to expect anyone else to understand. I couldn't give my kids beach vacations every summer, but I gave them time, something wealthier children rarely had. We didn't eat at fancy restaurants, but our dinners were full of laughter. We had story-building games, Friday cookie nights, and our tradition of 3 hugs before bed. Whenever Ryan asked, "Mom, are you tired?" I'd smile and say, "Not really, just need a little more coffee." Then he'd slip a handwritten note into my hand. "I love you, Mom." I never felt like a failure. I just felt forgotten. Like so many single mothers I've met teaching, nursing, driving Uber, juggling 2 or 3 jobs, we lived in the in-between, not poor enough for help, not rich enough for praise. We quietly kept the world moving, raised children, and fought to keep our hearts from hardening. And in all those years, no one ever asked what I needed. Until I reread my grandfather's documents and realized maybe I didn't need anyone to ask, because I already had the answer, and this time I would not fold that paper away and hide it in a drawer like I did when I was a child. I still remember that afternoon, standing on the steps of the white mansion my parents had given Amanda as a wedding gift. The slate roof gleamed, the walls were freshly painted, and the backyard stretched all the way to a white wooden fence. It looked like something straight out of a design magazine, so perfect it felt fake. "Don't forget to wipe your shoes before coming in, Bella," Amanda called from the living room, holding a glass of wine, her fitted dress flawless without a wrinkle. I forced a faint smile and stepped over the doormat embroidered with the word "welcome," a word I had never truly felt in that house. The party that day was for Charles's birthday, Amanda's husband. It was called a family gathering, but the atmosphere felt more like a showcase than a reunion. Charles shook hands with everyone as though he were entertaining investors, while Amanda circled the room directing servers like a Palm Beach socialite. I walked in, holding Chloe and Ryan's hands. Both of them were neatly dressed white shirts, khaki pants, shoes polished the night before. I had reminded them carefully, no running around, no touching things in the house, and above all, always be polite no matter what. Well, at least they looked tidy. My mother, Margaret, tilted her head and said, Children of a teacher may be poor, but at least they know how to save. I pressed my lips together. Chloe squeezed my hand tightly. I brought a gift for Mr. Charles, she whispered. I bent down, stroked her hair, and handed Margaret a small box of fountain pen I had bought with my tutoring money. Not expensive, but carefully wrapped, with a card Chloe had written herself. Margaret took it without opening. I'll add it to the gift pile so it doesn't get lost, she murmured vaguely. Meanwhile, Amanda's daughter, little Clara, ran up, her curly hair bouncing as she held a fancy imported doll. Grandma, look at my new dress. Margaret's face lit up as she bent down, admiring it, calling over guests to see. Next to me, Ryan lowered his head. I could feel the weight of his silence pressing on me. Dinner was served in a long dining room, the table covered in white linen, candles flickering, each dish labeled in French. I sat at the far end next to a guest I didn't know. Amanda was at the opposite end, laughing with her wealthy friends, calling for more champagne. You should try the foie gras, Charles said, glancing over my shoulder. Amanda sourced it from Bordeaux. I'm vegetarian, I replied softly. Ah, he smirked, nodding. Still frugal, just like in college. Good for you, staying consistent. I heard my father chuckle under his breath. Throughout the meal, I tried to help the children with their food, reminding them to chew slowly, not to talk with their mouths full. Chloe whispered that she wanted to go home. Ryan leaned his head against my shoulder, already dozing. Mom, Chloe murmured, why don't we ever have a two-tiered cake at home? I looked at her, gave a faint smile, but said nothing. I couldn't lie. I couldn't tell the truth either. After dinner, while everyone moved to the backyard to hear Charles give a speech, I slipped away to the balcony, the only quiet place. I stood there, staring at the perfectly trimmed garden, string lights sparkling, rows of white chairs lined up as though everything was exactly where it should be except me. I felt like an outsider invited only to fill an empty spot in their picture. My presence or absence didn't matter, as long as I didn't disrupt their carefully crafted composition. You shouldn't blame them, Bella. Amanda's voice came from behind me, still holding her wine glass. They just don't understand you. You live too differently. I turned to her. Different doesn't mean lesser. She smirked. No, one said you were lesser. They don't have to say it. I walked off the balcony, gathered the children, and left quietly. As I buckled Ryan's seatbelt, he looked up at me. Mom, why doesn't Grandma ever ask me what I learn at school? That simple question caught in my throat. I had always taught my children to be polite, to share, to listen, because I believed character mattered more than report cards. But I could never teach them how to accept being ignored. On the drive home, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The two of them had fallen asleep, their heads leaning against each other. My mind drifted back to that mansion, the setting for endless lavish parties where Amanda was the star and I was just a shadow called in when they needed to fill numbers. And then I thought about the bundle of documents my grandfather had left still in the old tin box on my bookshelf. Sealed, signed, with a note scribbled in blue ink. For when Isabella is ready. Maybe he had always known that one day I would refuse to stay silent. I went to my parents' house on a Friday afternoon, answering my mother's invitation for weekend tea, a call she had emphasized 3 separate times that week. She promised it would be a rare chance for family, no parties, just us. I was surprised, since my family never did anything simple, but I didn't ask questions. I had learned long ago not to ask when no one was willing to answer. Chloe was rehearsing for her school performance, and Ryan wanted to try making strawberry ice cream at home. I left them with our neighbor Sandra and drove there alone. The old Brantley Street mansion still stood tall, a relic of past family glory. The red brick house with its Italian-style arches had once been my father's badge of success and my mother's pride. She often said, "Only those who truly understand life can appreciate architecture." The door was unlocked. I stepped inside to the faint whistle of wind slipping through. A window upstairs, making the white curtains sway. The house was strangely silent, no TV, no footsteps shuffling across the wood floors. I walked down the hallway, about to head toward the living room, when hushed voices from the downstairs study stopped me. "We can't extend further unless you have new collateral," a man's firm voice said low, decisive, not the polite tone bankers used in casual talk. "We already mortgaged the house and the lodge on Lake Champlain," my father answered, his voice low, almost winded. "I just need 3 more months for Charles to raise the capital." I froze. "The house mortgaged?" "Mr. Whitaker," the man continued, "Charles owes over $800,000 across 3 unsecured loans. Negative cash flow for 5 consecutive quarters. We need proof you can cover the debt, otherwise we'll start the repossession process." Silence. "We have shares in Amanda's company," my mother cut in, her voice sharp and weary. "We invested from the start. It can't all be worthless." "Shares mean nothing when the company's on the verge of bankruptcy," the man replied coldly. I stepped back, my spine pressing against the wall. My whole body turned cold. The family mansion, once a symbol of power, stability, and the heavy weight of my childhood, was now collateral. And all for what? To save Charles's company? I rushed out the front door, my hands trembling as I turned the car key. On the drive back, their words replayed in my head, each sentence another crack in everything I thought was solid. Charles, the man who boasted about his new Dallas office, his international trips, was drowning. Amanda, the one posting 5-star dinners and spa days at beach resorts, was pretending. They still threw parties, still made speeches about success, still gave my parents expensive gifts at holidays, still paraded as the proud face of the Whitaker name. And me, the one who never borrowed, never begged, who raised 2 kids on a teacher's salary and tutoring was seen as the one not trying hard enough. I stopped at a small grocery store near home. Chloe had asked for almond milk. Ryan wanted strawberry ice cream with little seeds inside. As I pushed the cart down the frozen food aisle, my eyes still blurred by thoughts, it hit me. Amanda's extravagance, the parties, the dresses, the talk of success, was just a backdrop, a thin curtain covering a mountain of debt. And my parents, the ones who spent their lives preserving the family's perfect image, were now throwing their last assets into a gamble, not out of love, not for the future, but to avoid shame. I remembered my mother's words one Christmas years ago, when I brought homemade pies to share. "You don't need to make things like this, Bella. No one respects endurance. People only remember who rises." Now I understood. In her eyes, rising wasn't about character but handbags, not about resilience but brands. I left the store with 2 bags, my mind blank. At home, Ryan had tied a dish towel around his neck like a cape, jumping from chair to chair. Chloe sat reading, an apple slice in her mouth. "You know," I said as I sat beside her, "sometimes what people show off the most is exactly what they're afraid of losing." Chloe looked up, tilting her head. "Mom, you sound like you're in a novel." I laughed, stealing an apple slice from her plate. "Maybe I've been living in one too long." She closed her book, studying me seriously. "Is something wrong, Mom?" I brushed her hair back. "There are some things I need to think through. But you don't need to worry." I couldn't tell them yet what I had overheard, but I knew what I had to do. Not to save my parents from their mistakes, not to clean up Amanda and Charles's mess, but to protect the only thing I trusted, the future of Chloe and Ryan. And to do that, I needed to reopen the old tin box on my bookshelf. The box with the faded blue seal. Inside, the one thing that still held true value, a copy of my grandfather's trust, with a signature no one expected. My mother's 70th birthday party was held on a Saturday evening, early October, with the maple leaves at the mansion gates turning deep red, like silk banners draped across the path. I brought Chloe and Ryan early since my mother had emphasized in her message that there would be an important announcement before dinner. We carried a plum cake we had baked the night before. Chloe had carefully arranged each slice of plum on top, while Ryan cracked the eggs, spilling flour all over the table. I had laughed while cleaning, holding on to that small warmth of family we made together. When we arrived, the gate opened silently. No one waited outside. No Amanda, no Charles, not even a servant to take the cake. I led my children through the marble-floored hall, past the portraits staring down with their eternal solemnity, as though judging everyone who entered. The living room was packed. Relatives flown in from out of state, my mother's friends, my father's old colleagues, and others I no longer remembered still introduced as close family. The party was as lavish as I expected. Expensive wine, food on white porcelain with gold trim, a string quartet playing softly near the fireplace. The children and I slipped to the back of the room, finding a quiet corner. No one greeted us except for Evelyn, my grandfather's sister, now in her 80s, but still with the habit of holding hands when she spoke. "Isabella, sweet child," she said warmly, squeezing my hand, her eyes kind as they fell on my kids. "They've grown so fast. Tell me, has your mother mentioned the old trust your grandfather left behind?" I froze for a moment, but before I could answer, the faint clink of a glass against a spoon echoed from the center of the room. Margaret stood there in a wine-colored silk gown, her jewelry catching the light of the chandelier. She raised her voice. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with me today. 70 years, a beautiful number to begin a new chapter." I heard a few polite chuckles. She went on, "And since none of us live forever, I believe it's time to set everything in order for the future. Family is the most precious thing and also the place where we leave our mark." She picked up a folder bound in brown leather from a side table and held it aloft as if it were a prize. "This is the draft of my new will, prepared by my attorney, and in it I have designated Amanda, my eldest daughter, as the sole heir of all real estate. This house, the vacation home in Vermont, and the lakefront property." The room seemed to fall silent. Amanda stood beside her mother, smiling faintly as if she had known this for years. My father lingered in the background, arms crossed, nodding like a silent approver. I saw Chloe blink rapidly, while Ryan turned to me, his eyes confused but aware that something wasn't right. I stood still, betraying no expression. I had grown used to being left out of every decision. I no longer reacted. I no longer hoped. But as soon as she raised that draft high, I noticed something. The faint watermark at the top right corner, the name of the law office, was from a firm that had dissolved 15 years earlier, back when I was still a student assistant. The document she was holding could not be the most recent. I stepped forward, my eyes locked on the pages. I remembered every seal, every template that firm used in its files. They printed on special paper with an embossed mark at the bottom, and my grandfather's original will certainly did not carry that line. No one seemed to notice me at first, except Amanda, who leaned close and whispered in my ear, "You should just focus on your kids. I'll handle the big matters." Her tone was soft, almost breezy but full of pride. I turned and looked her straight in the eye. "I think," I said slowly, "we need to verify the legality of that document." My mother's head snapped toward me, her eyes sharp as blades. "What did you just say?" "That file you're holding, it's on stationery from a law firm that closed in 2008. It cannot possibly be an original. If you'd like, I can provide archived records from the office that handled grandfather's affairs." A ripple of whispers ran through the room. Margaret's grip tightened on the folder, her gaze locked on mine. "You're questioning your mother?" she asked, not loudly, but with cutting precision. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder, gently smoothing it. I'm questioning the motives of those who would use a will to legitimize their greed. A long silence followed. Amanda bent slightly, as if to divert attention. Charles moved forward, trying to take the folder from my mother's hands, but she clutched it tighter. I stood my ground, not angry, not shaken, just strangely calm. A breeze drifted in through a cracked door, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. I had nothing in hand but my memory and an old copy of the files my grandfather had left me. But one thing I knew: my family had grown too confident in assuming I would forever remain silent. They had no idea that the only person with authority under my grandfather's sealed claws was standing right in the middle of that room, steady, without shouting, with nothing but the truth. When I left that 70th birthday party, the air in the room was still thick and unsettled. My mother sat stiffly in her armchair, clutching the invalid draft she had just unveiled before the entire family. Amanda pulled Charles into the hallway, dialing someone, likely their attorney, or perhaps just to create a distraction. My father stood near the fireplace, his eyes following me, calculating which response would how invite cause the least damage to the flawless portrait he had painted all his life. I didn't say another word. I only looked around that room, at the rows of ancestor portraits on the walls, my gaze resting on the face of the one man who had believed in me unconditionally: my grandfather, Samuel Whitaker. He was the first to recognize that I wasn't like the rest of them, not loud, not attention-seeking, always observing. I remembered summer afternoons when he would invite me to the second-floor balcony to drink tea and work crossword puzzles. He often said, "Isabella, the things nobody notices, those are the ones you must remember. The most important things are always where others refuse to look." I had carried his words with me until this very day. The very next morning, I sent Ryan and Chloe to Sandra's house. I told them their mom had a few things to take care of and would pick them up later. They didn't ask questions. They knew I never abandoned them and that some battles had to be fought alone. I drove to the old building on Summerfield Street, once the office of Eugene Carter, my grandfather's longtime friend and legal advisor. It was now a small architecture firm, but the basement archives remained intact. I had worked there for 3 summers in college, sorting records, digitizing files, until Mr. Carter trusted me enough to hand me the keys. I knocked, introduced myself as Samuel Whitaker's granddaughter and a former assistant. A middle-aged woman answered, surprised but kind, and after a few phone calls, she escorted me to the basement where original client files were still stored. The air was damp, the light dim and yellow. File cabinets stood in neat rows. I found the drawer labeled Whitaker Samuel and soon spotted a small safe beneath it marked in Mr. Carter's handwriting, "Personal trust opened by recipient's directive." I reached into my bag for the ring of old keys I had kept all these years. My hands trembled as I turned the lock, and the click that followed sounded like confirmation. Everything was still intact. Inside lay a thick folder wrapped in moisture-proof plastic and a handwritten letter. I opened the letter first. The paper had yellowed, the ink smudged, but the words were clear. To Isabella, if you are reading this, it means you have stepped into the battle I always believed would come sooner or later. Don't be surprised. You were always the only one calm enough to see things without the glaze of emotion. I established a trust in 2002 to protect the core assets of the Whitaker family from any financial recklessness the next generation might cause. This trust is hidden, not listed in the public will, and it can only be activated with the consent of the legal guardian. That guardian is you. They won't be happy, but remember, you are not taking anything from them. You are preserving what never truly belonged to anyone but the Whitaker name. Don't be afraid. You are more prepared for this than you realize. I laid the letter aside, my chest tight. The folder held the original trust agreement, signed by my grandfather and Mr. Carter, notarized, sealed, and complete with detailed clauses, Every asset, including the mansion, the Vermont retreat, and the lakefront land, was placed under protection. No sale, no mortgage, no transfer could be made without authorization from the sole legal guardian, Isabella Claire Whitaker. No co-signers, no division, no exceptions. This was why the firm my mother cited at the party could never have produced an updated will. They had no legal grounds to interfere with assets already secured. I snapped photos of every page, stored them in an encrypted folder, then called the one person I thought I'd never need, Great Aunt Evelyn. Despite her age, her mind was sharper than anyone else's. When I explained what I had found, she simply said, "So at last, you've laid hands on what is yours." I sat in my car afterward, silent. Not from fear, not from doubt, but because the weight in my chest was finally lifting. My whole life, I had never had the authority to decide anything in this family. And now, I held their entire framework in my hands, not to destroy it, but to guard what was meant to endure, and to make them see me truly. On Sunday morning, I returned to the Whitaker mansion unannounced. The remnants of the party still littered the yard, balloons drooping from the railings, gold ribbons turned inside out by the night wind, glasses tilted on tables still reeking of stale champagne. I rang the bell. No answer. Yet the door stood ajar, as if waiting. I stepped inside, carrying a simple canvas bag with official copies of the legal documents I had carefully prepared. No envelopes, no grand speeches, just papers and truth. In the living room, my father stood by the window, hands in his pockets, tie still on. My mother sat pale on the couch, her temples dabbed with scented oil. Amanda stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, her makeup flawless, though her eyes betrayed the collapse of her performance. "What are you here for?" my father asked, not turning. "I think everyone deserves clarity," I said, placing the bag on the glass table. Amanda laughed, brittle as glass. "What now? Another threat? Do you want money, or do you want us to grovel before the family?" "No one here owes me an apology," I replied, my eyes steady on hers. "What I want is recognition of what is lawful and rightfully mine." I opened the bag and drew out the file. Every page bore signatures, seals, and a current certification. I didn't hand it over. I set it calmly on the polished wood. "This is the official trust my grandfather created in 2002, I said. "It clearly states that all real estate, including this mansion, the Vermont retreat, and the majority of the lake property are protected assets. They cannot be mortgaged, transferred, or sold." My mother sprang from her seat. "That's impossible," he never mentioned. "He didn't need to," I interrupted. "He left it in writing, notarized, witnessed. And the most important detail." I pulled out a page, holding it up, "is that the sole guardian authorized to manage the trust, the only person with full approval rights, is Isabella Claire Whitaker." The room froze as though every window had been shut tight. My father's jaw clenched before he spun around. "Enough. You're fabricating all this to ruin this family's reputation. This legal trick, who taught you? Who's backing you?" "No one," I said, my gaze unwavering. "These are my grandfather's papers, with Carter's signature, the family's own attorney. I'm simply carrying the responsibility you all abandoned." Amanda lunged, snatched a page, skimmed it, then flung it back onto the table. "This is a scam," she shouted. "Who are you to decide for everyone? What have you ever done for this family except sit quietly, pretending you're above us?" "And you?" I asked evenly. "Your company bankrupt 3 straight quarters in debt, borrowing in our parents' names. Everything you flaunt, the mansion, the investments, the luxury cars, was funded with illegally pledged assets. And you want to call me the outsider?" My mother sank back onto the couch, covering part of her face with one hand, as if shielding herself from an unspoken glare. The arrogance was gone. So was the anger. We can negotiate, she whispered. What do you want? A parcel of land? A fund for the children? You can have it, just don't expose this. There's nothing to negotiate, I said. Because when I had nothing, no one in this family would listen. And now that I hold the legal documents, you call it something to hide. I turned to my father, the man who once said to me when I asked for advice about teaching, if you choose a small path, don't expect a big place. I don't want any place at all, I replied, keeping my voice calm. I just want everyone to stop looking down on me and my children because we don't live like the rest of you. Amanda slammed her hand on the table. So what are you planning to do? Throw us out? Make yourself queen of this house? I walked toward her slowly. No one needs to be queen of a palace that's about to collapse, I said. I'll do exactly what the law allows. Freeze all financial activity tied to the trust's assets. This mansion will be reassessed, the Vermont retreat will be pulled from collateral records, and I'll appoint an independent attorney to oversee everything. Amanda, you no longer have the right to sign anything. She froze, then screamed, I'm the eldest. I was chosen. I'm the center of this family. I shook my head. You were indulged. I was chosen by grandfather because I knew how to guard what mattered. My mother leaned forward suddenly, gripping the armrest. Samuel did this because Margaret wasn't fair enough, she said, her voice breaking. He told me once I was blind, that I was teaching my children to live by appearances. I didn't answer. I only looked at her, not with anger, not with pity, but with the clarity of knowing she had long lost the ability to tell love apart from control. No one else in the room spoke. I pulled out my phone and called the lawyer I'd arranged the day before. I'll send the documents by email this afternoon, I said, keeping my eyes on the three in front of me. Starting next week, every access to trust assets will require my approval or that of a representative I appoint. My father squinted at me, as though seeing a stranger. And perhaps, to him, I truly was a stranger, the daughter he had never really looked at until now. The air in the living room was so thick it felt like every particle was listening, waiting for what I'd say next. My father moved to the table, picking up a half-finished glass of whiskey from the night before. His grip was so tight the knuckles turned white. He took a small sip, set the glass down gently, and without looking at me, asked, Do you plan to take this to court, Isabella? That depends on how you respond today, I answered. But if things continue to be hidden the way they have these past weeks, then court will be the last but necessary place to protect grandfather's legacy. Amanda scoffed, her lips curling with mockery. Legacy? You've never managed a single commercial asset, never run a business. And you think you deserve to call yourself the guardian of a legacy? You don't need to be a business owner to understand the difference between responsibility and privilege, I said evenly. I don't spend other people's money and call it success. And I don't borrow under my parents' names to keep up a fake lifestyle. Charles entered from the back hallway, his face darkening at my words. Don't drag me into your family mess. I turned and looked directly at him. You are the center of this mess, Charles. If you hadn't used the Whitaker name for illegal loans, if you hadn't pressured Amanda into shady investment contracts, maybe things wouldn't have reached this point. Amanda lifted her head, her eyes cracking. I didn't know anything about those contracts. You signed them all, I cut in. I have copies of the phantom stock agreements in the Cayman Islands, with your signature sent from Charles's company email. No one forced you. You chose it yourself. I pulled up a flagged email on my phone and tilted the screen toward them. Neither moved closer. They didn't need to. They already knew. Silence fell again. But it wasn't the silence of helplessness. It was the uneasy quiet of people stripped of their last layers. Remember the so-called family reunion Mom hosted? Last month? I asked, still holding Amanda's gaze. That envelope she handed me told me it was a thank you gift. Inside was a legal authorization form. My mother opened her mouth, then shut it. I went on. A carefully drafted document asking me to temporarily sign over full authority to Amanda for 6 months, including withdrawal rights from the trust. They said it was just a formality, that she needed a little financial flexibility to restructure the company. I paused. That party wasn't about family. It was a trap. Charles turned away, muttering a curse under his breath as he pulled out his phone, clearly wanting to escape the conversation. Amanda stood frozen, her face pale, her lips drained of color. "You're exaggerating," my father snapped. "The company has problems, yes, but not enough for you to stage some interrogation at home." I laughed lightly the first time that morning. Then why did Charles open 3 personal accounts overseas under intermediaries' names? Why does Amanda transfer money monthly to a bank in Belize? And why? I stopped hearing the doorbell ring. Every eye turned to the front door. My mother looked at me, suspicion written all over her face. I hadn't invited anyone. Footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. And then a salt and pepper-haired man in a charcoal suit entered, carrying a leather case. On his lapel gleamed a silver pin. Carter Legal, Independent Estate Counsel. My mother's eyes widened. My father's grip tightened on the chair arm. Amanda stepped back, as if confronted by a ghost from the past she thought long buried. I rose to my feet, smiling. Mr. Eugene Carter, grandfather's personal attorney, and the keeper of the original trust documents. Mr. Carter moved to the center of the room, set down his case, and opened it. "I haven't come to intimidate," he said, his deep voice steady and deliberate. "I've come to confirm that everything Isabella has presented matches the records in my possession, and I am bound to fulfill Samuel Whitaker's instructions." Amanda shook her head, her lips trembling. "No, grandfather wouldn't do that. He always loved me." "Love doesn't mean blindness, Mr. Carter replied, his eyes fixed on her. "Samuel once told me, if Margaret cannot keep the fire, then let the granddaughter who knows how guard the woodpile." The words nearly broke my mother. "I don't think you realize the severity of this," Mr. Carter continued. "Illegally using the trust's name for loans, transferring money overseas, forging a will, these could all amount to criminal fraud." No one responded. I sat down, resting my hand on the file as if it had been my shield all these years. But now, I no longer needed protection. The truth was laying itself bare, layer by layer, and there was nowhere left to hide. I sat quietly on the leather chair across from 3 people bound to me by blood but never by loyalty. What I held wasn't power to destroy, but the chance to set everything right. Mr. Carter closed his case and took a seat beside me. He didn't need to speak further. His presence alone was proof that what I had said wasn't accusation but legal fact. I looked at each of them, my father, still frozen, his eyes heavy, my mother, bewildered, clinging to her last fragments of composure. Amanda, the only one still standing, but with nothing left to lean on. I spoke slowly, clearly. "I won't take anyone to court. I won't call the authorities if it all ends today." My mother leaned forward slightly, as if to exhale in relief, but I didn't stop. "But to end this, you must understand I'm not here to divide spoils. I don't hold control of this trust to reward myself, or to sustain a lifestyle of seasonal morals and staged luxury." Amanda clenched her fists, her face pale. Charles had already slipped out when Carter arrived, trying to wash his hands of it all. I opened the next folder, a plan I had drafted over 3 sleepless nights, after consulting an independent financial expert. "I will use the trust's assets to establish a scholarship program for underprivileged children in Massachusetts, especially those with talent in STEM and community education who lack the means to pursue it. No one spoke. The program will be called the Whitaker Grant for Opportunity, funded by the current real estate assets, restructured and partially converted into a support fund. I'll also convert part of the Vermont retreat into a summer learning center, just as grandfather once said. Knowledge is the only wealth that never disappears if shared wisely. My father closed his eyes, his hands interlaced as if in prayer. I turned to Amanda. She froze, then slowly walked toward me. Please, she whispered hoarsely. You can't do this to me. I raised my head, meeting her gaze. You did this to yourself long ago. She said nothing more. Only tears slid down her face, not in sobs, but quietly, like someone realizing the fracture in the family hadn't come from outside, but had long been rotting within. I looked at my mother, stripped now of her authority. She seemed older, weaker, her tired eyes avoiding mine. I don't hate you, I said, but you must understand that love cannot be forced by silence, nor sustained by favoritism. I grew up in this house as a shadow, and today, I stop not to take revenge, but to break the cycle you created. She pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve, dabbing slowly at the corner of her eye. Can you forgive? She asked softly, the first time in my life. I'd heard her voice without command. I can forget, I said, but I cannot return to silence. I stood up, gathered the folder, and straightened each page with care. Mr. Carter nodded, a silent signal that every step ahead would follow the plan I had set. The trust isn't mine alone, I said one last time as I left the living room. But from today, it will serve those who never had the chance to stand in a house like this. I turned and walked away, leaving behind the people who once believed I would forever remain a supporting character in the story they wrote. But I was no longer the one asking permission for a seat at the table. I was the one deciding who deserved a seat. That spring came late, yet I had never seen sunlight feel so gentle. I stood in front of my new home, holding a cup of ginger tea, steam fogging my glasses. The house sat on the edge of Northampton, close enough to town, yet quiet enough to hear the wind slip past the eaves. Close enough that Chloe could bike to the library, and Ryan had space in the backyard to grow vegetables in what he proudly called his outdoor biology lab. The house wasn't large. No spiral staircase, no crystal chandeliers like my parents' old mansion. But the wooden floors gleamed after we sanded them, the walls painted soft cream by our own hands. The living room had a big window facing the garden, where lavender bushes we planted now bloomed purple beneath the morning sunday. Chloe sat on the porch steps, scribbling in a small notebook. She wore amber-tinted glasses, once too shy to wear in front of her cousins, afraid of their teasing. Now she didn't care. Ryan was nearby, tinkering with straws and a water bottle, bobbing to music. She had declared she was building an automatic sprinkler out of recycled plastic. I set my tea on the railing and checked my phone. This week, the Whitaker Education Center was hosting its first training for a group of Amherst College volunteers. 12 college students had signed up to tutor children from low-income neighborhoods, the kind of students I taught a decade ago. But now, I was no longer just a classroom teacher. I was the program director. The one building the training model, overseeing scholarship funding, setting the standard that no child would be dismissed because of their background. Sometimes I still found it hard to believe that I had truly stepped out from under the weight that pressed on me for nearly 30 years. I used to think if I didn't keep trying, my kids would forever be looked at with pity or worse, contempt, but I realized it wasn't that I lacked value. I had simply let others define it by things that were never mine to begin with. Chloe ran over, plopped beside me, and placed her notebook on her lap. Mom, can I invite a friend over this weekend? I want to hang my poem on the bedroom wall. I smiled. Of course, as long as your friend isn't scared of the paint smell. I'll use scented paper, and don't worry, the room's cleaner than it used to be. I brushed her hair back. I'm not worried about the room. I just want to know if you're happy. Chloe tilted her head. I feel like I can be myself now. I think that's happiness. From the yard, Ryan shouted, "Mom, the water's spraying. It works." I laughed, heading down to the garden. The cut-up plastic bottle with straws stuck in it was hooked to a bucket. Ryan twisted a little nozzle, and water spurted out not high, but enough to wet the soil. "I call it our water 3.0, he clapped. "And where are 1.0 and 2.0? I teased. "They didn't survive testing," he whispered gravely, making me burst out laughing. I looked toward the street as an old car drove past. My thoughts went to Amanda. News of Charles's company bankruptcy spread just weeks after that confrontation. All assets in Amanda's name were frozen by the bank. The Range Rover once parked in front of the mansion sold for less than half its value. They left the city, renting a small apartment in Springfield. They vanished from charity galas and fundraisers where Amanda used to shine as the centerpiece. As for my parents, they now lived in a modest, single-story house in Northborough, smaller than mine. My mother turned her once expensive hobby into a small home-based fashion consulting service. My father offered legal advice by the hour, no longer running his own firm, no longer with assistants. The last time I visited, he was crouched down, fixing a loose kitchen cabinet hinge. His hands, once only familiar with fountain pens and orders, now covered in grease. I felt no gloating, no satisfaction. Only that things had settled back into their rightful place. What once weighed down on me I hadn't thrown back, but I no longer carried it either. Evening settled slowly. Chloe and Ryan sat at the wooden table we built, mixing lemonade and writing invitations for the open garden day they had imagined. I watched them, my heart softening. Back on the porch, I sank into the rocking chair, brushing hair from my forehead. The breeze was light. The lavender scent mingled with the damp earth. Peace, a feeling I once thought I'd never know, wrapped around me. I looked out at the yard where my children chased each other, laughter spilling under the sunlight, and I whispered, for the wind alone, sometimes, to protect your real family, you have to let go of the blood that poisons you. I don't know if anyone has lived through a journey like mine, where protecting yourself and those you love means standing up, even if it means standing against your own family. But I believe everyone has a breaking point, a moment when bowing your head is no longer possible. And when that moment comes, it isn't to destroy, but to rebuild a version of life that is fairer, kinder. I was once the forgotten child in a cold, grand house. Once the woman told to stay silent for the family's image. Once someone who believed if I tried hard enough, they would change. They didn't change, but I did. And that's what let me step out of the shadow of the past, to build a future filled with light for me and for my children. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself? Have you ever had to choose between filial duty and self-respect? I want to hear your story in the comments. If you've connected with this journey or witnessed something like it in your own family, don't hesitate to share. Sometimes a single honest story can ease the pain of someone listening quietly. And if you want to stay with me for more stories about complicated families, difficult choices, and people learning to love themselves the right way, hit subscribe, because life never runs out of shocks, but it never runs out of chances to heal either.